What's up, everybody? Today you're going to get your first look at squad gameplay in the Unreal 5 engine, because we're going to be interviewing Norby, the director of technology at Offworld, and he's going to be discussing a lot of the tech and tools utilized in the Unreal 5 engine as squad transitions over. And along with the interview, we have some closed playtesting footage, which you're witnessing now, along with some behind-the-scenes looks. So hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with your thoughts. I have chapters down in the description below if you'd like to see certain aspects of the conversation. And with that, we'll get right to it. All right, Norby, welcome. Thank you for taking time to do this. And if you will give us a little bit of an introduction to you, your role at Offworld, and maybe something you've worked on outside of stuff related to Unreal 5.
Yep. Hi, Slay. I'm the director of technology at Offworld. I'm one of the co-founders, so I've been here since the start, and therefore I've been doing many things over the years. In the beginning, we were such a small group that almost all of us had to wear many hats. I mean, some people were specialized, right? Anders always did sounds, Bruno did always effects, but most of us were doing many things. I was involved in production. I did some design things, programming things. But yeah, right now my responsibility is the overall technology area. So in that role, I oversee, of course, the programming efforts, but also look towards the future, look at what technologies are evolving out there and how can we incorporate them for the benefit of our workflows and of course, make the game better.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump in. This whole conversation is about Unreal 5. So let's start diving into that. Can you talk a little bit about the areas that you were focused on? I know you said you're part of your responsibility is to look forward at technology. Can you give us kind of an overview of some of those things that you've touched on with this transition?
Yes, of course. So Unreal 5 isn't new by any means now. It's been out for 3 years. And we've been looking at it the entire time and looking at how it's evolving and experimenting with it, understanding what components are in there and what components can we use to make the game better. It's important to remember that Unreal is not just a game engine for us. It's mainly the toolkit that we use to create the game. So if we didn't have that, just creating the tools we need to make the game would take a team larger than the squad team only to have that tool set. So Unreal, the most important thing for us is really what it enables us to do with the tool that it ships with. And so Unreal Engine 5 is a big advancement in that direction. The tools we have access to are much more advanced for the creation of games. And that's ultimately our job. So there are things like procedural tools for level creation that allow the level creation workflow to be much, much smoother. And we've already seen that with Basrah, that we get output much more quickly. And that should extend to our modding community as well, where I think the scope of making a modded map that is large scale, high fidelity for just one person it's really unthinkable to what people go through to get to that result, and many are struggling to make the time for that. And with procedural tools, that should become much more achievable. Whereas some of these amazing projects that modders have started on, hopefully they can bring to fruition much more smoothly. And then there's kind of the marketing things that we think about when we hear Unreal Engine 5, the things that Epic has been promoting, which are more focused around the games and the rendering. And so we looked at that part as well and what components of that we bring into Squad. Speaking
of what Offworld set out to do, like what were some of the high level goals? Like what did you guys set out to accomplish with this transition? Because obviously it's a large undertaking.
The question, I guess, starts with what makes Squad unique. And so how Squad sets itself apart to many other shooters is for reasons of the driven by realism and trying to emulate how real battles happen. The combat distances are a lot longer than in many other shooters. So we have the challenge of trying to achieve maximum visual fidelity at a different distance compared to many other games. And so we look at that and how do we increase the visual fidelity at the distances that typical engagements in Squad happen. Because it probably doesn't matter too much what something looks like right in front of you, because you're not going to have a hard time spotting enemies there. But when we're talking a few hundred meters away for an engagement, We really want that to be a good experience. We want it to be fair and consistent. So if you are applying tactical thinking to your movement, if you say, hey, I want to move through darker areas, try to conceal myself a little bit, then we want to make sure that another person who's a few hundred meters away, who might be observing you, also sees these areas at darkened, and you don't stand out to them, even though you think you're kind of hidden. So that consistency is really important, and it should also be the same whether you're playing on like a low-end laptop or a high-end system to all the graphic settings. So those were some of the goals, is really focus on the squad gameplay, understand what makes it unique, and try to enhance these components. And one of the main selling points of UE5 is Nanite. Right? That's a term that's been thrown around everywhere. Nanite, what is it? It's a virtual geometry system. Well, what does that mean? From my perspective, Nanite is probably the biggest advancement in rendering technology we have seen in at least a decade, more than that. In traditional rendering, the CPU passes the information about what meshes we need to render in the scene onto the GPU. And the GPU draws all them into buffers, and then does some culling to reduce the amount you need to actually render. But let's say you see the corner of a building on your screen, and the rest of it is covered. That entire building needs to get rendered, all of it, and there's no way to reduce that, because like once a little bit of it is visible, it just needs to be all drawn, and so it's very wasteful at times. And to reduce some of that cost, one traditional method that exists is LOD system, level of detail. And so you would have versions of that building that are lower fidelity, and then as you go further away, as that building gets smaller on your screen, gets swapped out for a lower fidelity version. And in an ideal world, these are manually altered, these LODs, and they look perfect. As you transition, you'd never notice. But in reality, for a game like Squad, small team, a lot of content, you auto-generate these LODs, and they are imperfect, right? You can see these LOD transitions. You can see them in Squad all the time, the LODs popping.
Norby, this would be like if I'm in a vehicle and I'm driving into a city, and like you see sort of the pop of buildings going from almost like a little bit fuzzy, blurry, like not all the detail, and then it pops in and it's sharp, right? That's the LOD working.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff it really struggles with this auto loading is preserving a lot of smaller detail, and so you might really notice some smaller detail popping out that just completely disappeared in that distance LOD. And these distances for when they become visible or not being perfectly tuned. And yeah, for perfect visuals, and some of these games out there have achieved that on really large budgets. Which it's possible, but it requires a lot of manual work, and so Squad isn't at that level. But that's how you would traditionally be able to optimize a scene to run well. And so what Nanite does is it virtualizes all that management of the geometry. So it will only draw what you need on the scene. If you just have a corner of the building visible, it will only load that geometry in that you need. And the amount of detail that you need, it automatically breaks that down. So it has a clustering system where if you don't need that full resolution, it reduces it. It's aiming for 1 triangle per pixel, roughly. Because more than that, you cannot render, right? You don't have the resolution on your screen to actually benefit of that. And yeah, dynamically doing all this work that we had to do manually previously to try and optimize it, it massively accelerates that workflow. So artists have to do far less manual fine-tuning to get things to run well. That's really the power of the tool. Is one, it allows us to have much more geometric detail, especially out into the distance, where before we had very simple LODs and you could see that detail is missing. We don't have to do that anymore. The detail is going to be there out to the pixel level as much as you can render. It will be preserved. And 2, we have to spend less time manually optimizing.
Okay.
And the system takes care of it for us. So it is an absolute game changer on that side.
Is this, and I could be wrong about this, does this also affect, like, I know, for example, sometimes you're in a vehicle, let's say a main battle tank, you're looking really far across a map, and maybe certain textures like a fence or something like that doesn't appear. Is that also like a part of what Nanite can help with?
Yeah, indirectly. So what you're describing is a culling issue. So on Squad previously in UE4, to achieve the performance targets, we had to distance cull pretty much everything on the rendering side. So once you are far enough away from something, it will just not render anymore. But distance culling doesn't take into account field of view. So when you have very high magnification, because that tank side is so zoomed in, then you still actually notice that fence that you would normally never see. And it doesn't come in. Like a normal LOD system is based on screen space, so you get a higher detailed version when you're zoomed in. With distance culling, it just never renders in. So yeah, you might have a situation where someone in their local area sees something different compared to you a kilometer away. And with Nanite, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We don't have to do that distance culling because Nanite takes care of it. In Nanite, every material in the scene is a single draw call. That's its true power. Like you can have 1,000 times that mesh in the distance. Let's say it's a fence, and does it all in a single draw call. It's incredibly fast when things are repeated. So we obviously reworking the entire game takes time, right? All these art assets, so we're not making full use of it yet. But for some of these situations, especially Basrah, which is the new map that's been optimized for UE5, that benefits the most. But even on older maps, we have reduced the distance culling and hopefully alleviated some of these gameplay issues that were caused by it.
In some of like the images that have been posted on social, there's like a huge difference in like lighting, and I think this has probably been one of the most impressive things that I've seen from closed playtesting. And I know that I think in the notes, like there was, for example, virtual shadow maps and global illumination are two things that were highlighted as a part of what Unreal 5 can bring to the game. Can we first talk about virtual shadow maps? Because I think one thing that's really interesting is the contrast in forest areas and buildings and stuff like that. And you guys have been fine tuning along the way and adding different times of day and stuff like that.
So for Nanite, the sheer amount of geometry poses challenges for the shadow rendering. Squad always had fully dynamic shadows because we might want to have a dynamic light source that moves and then you want your shadows dynamically updating. But also because baking shadows takes an incredible amount of time, and so doing that on something that's constantly updating is a pain. But for using Nanite, that amount of geometry, you need a shadow system that does things a lot smarter to not be too expensive. And so that's the engine comes with a new system called Virtual Shadow Maps, where it does a lot of caching of the shadows and dynamically updating the quality as needed. So as you get closer to an area of a map, the shadow quality will increase there, but it's still all cached, and so only parts of the overall shadows will update. And one thing that allows us is to remove the maximum shadow draw distance. So another thing that was inconsistent on Squad before is that if your engagements are pretty close, you're going to have the same shadows, you and the enemy. But your engagements are at a really long range, especially at vehicle fighting ranges, you would see them not in the shadow because that's past shadow drawing distance, versus they are thinking they might be in the shadow of a tree. And it's just not rendered for you. And some of the maps had actually really low shadow distances. For example, Fallujah, it's 200 meters right now. It just gets too expensive past that because we had so many buildings. But with virtual shadow maps, we don't have that limitation anymore. So shadows draw indefinitely. They draw for the entire map all the time. And so we, again, increase this consistency between what you see and what the enemy sees. There's still tuning that we do on that, on how quickly it updates, because obviously updating is a dynamic cost that we're paying, right? The caching is a VRAM cost, but the updating is something that the GPU always works on. And so scaling that between low end and high end is still something we're tuning in right now.
If it's on Fallujah, you said currently with UE4, it's 200 meters is the shadow distancing. Is that right? What is it, like the whole map for UE5, or in between 200 meters and the whole map?
No, you're going to go up in the sky. You can load into Fallujah right now. And for one, Fallujah is going to run way faster than in UE4 because of Nanite, because of these technologies. You probably noticed that a lot of the buildings look similar. So like I said, Nanite is really fast when you have the same materials. And so on maps like Fallujah, that's an incredible benefit. And so Fallujah renders faster. It has less problems with stuttering. And you get the shadows for the entire map if you're go up with the camera if you're up in a helicopter. Yeah, there's no limitation.
Okay. What about global illumination?
Yeah, so global illumination, this is maybe the other thing that people were thinking about when I was talking about the biggest innovation in rendering in a long time. But actually, it's better known as ray tracing as a marketing term. It's been a thing for a really long time. And so getting ray tracing in real time into games has been a goal of many implementations. There have been many GPUs coming out with hardware acceleration for that. What Unreal Engine 5 has done is that they wanted ray tracing support for all possible hardware. And so they found a solution to make it work without requiring these hardware accelerators, ray tracing the how the light hits the scene. And so that's called Lumen in UE5. A lot of games have shipped with it. We've been using it in the Starship Troopers game. But we have learned that the performance side of it isn't where we need it to be for Squad. And so while in a game like Starship Troopers, you might be able to turn it off and it's fine. In Squad, that was not an option, right? Because it changes the scene so much when you have ray traced lighting, right? Darker areas now don't get any light and they're actually dark. And that difference is so big that if you have the option to turn it off, a game like Squad, everyone has to turn it off because it will make it easier to see an enemy who's hiding in a building. And so to avoid that, we had to find a global illumination solution that is so fast that we can turn it on for everyone. So we needed something different. Lumen was not going to work for us. And we have a solution now that is, it's working differently. It's dynamically generating a voxelized representation of the world. So it's sort of making a Minecraft version of the Squad world and running the light in there. So it's a very rough approximation and also for reflection. So that's something if you really spot for it, like let's say you look in the puddle down and you see how a tree further away gets reflected in it and kind of looks like Minecraft. So that's that representation that gets used in there. And that runs extremely fast, and we have that on for everyone. It doesn't look quite as good as maybe Lumen. It definitely doesn't look as good as hardware ray tracing, especially on the reflections. But we can have it running for everyone, and so you get consistent visuals from the low end to the high end. And yeah, with that comes the need to enable eye adaptation, because now scenes are vastly brighter or darker, depending on whether you're inside, outside. It's more physically correct lighting. And that means that we, similar to how a camera works, when you use your phone to take a picture, it will meter how much light is in the scene and adjust it correctly. The game does something similar now, where it will balance out so that you get sort of the same brightness in the scene. Even indoors, it will brighten it up. When you walk outdoors, it darkens it down. That's another technology that we brought in new now for Squad.
So Norby, we're going to talk a little bit about performance. I think this is probably one area that the community is most interested in, most concerned about, frankly. First, I want to get maybe your understanding from a tech perspective. When you hear optimization, performance in the game, what starts to come to mind as a game dev?
Yeah, so performance, there are many components to performance. One is you look at frame rate, but the other is more the subjective feel of how does a game feel responsive, smoothness, that sort of thing. So the hitching is actually one of the biggest issues in Squad right now. Right, you might get great performance if you wander off to the edge of the map and are nowhere near the fighting and then look at the sky, and you get great frame rates in Squad. But then when you go in the middle of the fight and the enemy comes around the corner, and then some VFX goes off and your game hitches and you lose a few frames, then you miss that shot and you're dead. That's the time when performance causes frustration. And so that's where we really wanted to put the focus for this one. Understanding where these hitches are coming from, the frame rate inconsistencies, and addressing those. And that's part of why we need to keep upgrading the engine, because a lot of this is caused by legacy technology that we want to get rid of. So one common hitch that's by design in Squad right now is driven by limitations of the physics engine. The physics engine that we use is very old, and it in UE4 squad is very old. We have 32-bit precision in there, and with the squad maps, that's so large that we run into issues when you're really far out on the edge of the map and you were trying to aim precisely. The 32-bit precision wasn't enough anymore. So 32-bit floating point is basically you have a line of numbers, and let's say you're really far to the origin, and so then that number looks like that, and you have a lot of precision behind your decimal separator, right? But if you are really far away, then this part is really big, and then you have just one there left there behind the decimal separator. So that's why the precision wasn't enough anymore at the edge of the map, and we needed a system there to increase your precision for getting accurate shots. And what we ended up doing is implement something called world origin rebasing. In very early versions of Unreal's, that was promoted as the solution to that problem. But then Epic ended up not supporting it going forward, and we had to manually support it. And what that does is basically your local environment shifts where it considers the origin of the world to be near you. As you move away from it, eventually it catches up to you. But whenever that happens, the entire world shifts, right? Everything that exists around you needs to get updated to a new location, and that comes with a hitch that's really unavoidable, which is probably why Epic dropped support for that. It's just a fundamentally flawed approach. And that is in UE4 squad right now, and it causes a bunch of these hitches. And in UE5, that's not needed anymore, because the new physics engine that ships with UE5 Chaos is now designed to support 64-bit precision. And so that's so much precision that you never ever need to rebase, even if you were making a map as big as the entire world. And yeah, so it's one of the reasons to go to UE5 is we removed this performance issue that we had due to legacy systems in the game.
Will you break down precompiled shaders as a part of the performance?
Another really common cause for hitches in games in general is when your GPU encounters a new shader, a new material that it doesn't know how to render, and then the driver gets instructed to compile that shader on the run, and it just takes a moment, and that's a small hitch. And so what we need to do to avoid that is compile these shaders ahead of time. And there are systems in the engine that try to do that smartly, try to predict what shaders we might encounter and catch them. But it never really managed to catch all of them. And so we are now precompiling shaders on launch, and that should hopefully catch almost all possible variations. Because on a console, it's not a problem because you have a defined system and you ship all these shaders precompiled. But when you look at a PC, everyone has a different driver version and a different GPU and CPU combination and so on. There's so many possible variations that you need to compile those locally for your system as needed. And so we need to send these instructions with the game for what you might encounter, and then have them all precompiled, and then they're good to go, and you're going to run without hitching.
With all this in mind, what would you say the player base should expect when it comes to Unreal 5 and the sort of performance improvements that you all have set out to achieve?
The expectation on what we're really looking for feedback with the playtesting as well is, does this hold true? Is the experience smoother when you are in combat? Do you get less hitches, or maybe there are new issues, right, that we might not have seen in our testing so far? So that's really the important feedback. For general like frame rate, we gather some metrics automatically, so we have a pretty good idea there. And yeah, like I said, that was not even the focus of this. It was really that smoothness of the experience when you are in the middle of it.
Okay, and do you guys collect data, for example, on like the player base and their equipment? Because I know that is like a common concern, and we may be getting a little bit away from the technical side, but I'm curious how that factors into how you guys figure out some of this from like a planning and execution. Because obviously, like to your point, there's going to be a range of tech specifications. Someone might have a 1080, someone's got the 5090. How does that account in some of this conversation around the transition to UE5?
Yeah, so we definitely consider that. We do have some data for hardware use. So a lot of people are familiar with the Steam hardware survey, right? It gets published every month. But what not everyone knows is that Steam gives a hardware survey per game to the publisher of that game. So if we go on the Steam backend, we can get a hardware survey from Steam for squad owners. And what do squad owners have? And they tend to have better systems than the average Steam user. And so we look at that, and we look at what's the current distribution. Right now, for example, a 3060 is the most common GPU among squad players. And so this is the target system that we have been, or one of the systems we've been running tests on, is really optimized for that. Right? We don't really look at the high end at all. We look at what's the most common low end GPU, and what's the just general most common hardware. What's like a lower average. And try to optimize for those. For the low end, the one thing that comes with these new technologies is typically they all require some amount of VRAM. And Squad, since 10 years ago, has required that you have 4 gigabytes of VRAM according to the minimum system requirements on Steam. And we have been sticking with that. But really, the game is already going above that budget at times in UE4. And so now with the UE5, we're making the step that we're updating these and saying for minimum, you should have 6 gigabytes of VRAM. And so the GPU for that would be a 1060 with 6 gigabytes. And that was a really popular GPU for a long time. It came out 9 years ago, but still in use a decent amount today. And so that's another system that we've been optimizing for. And yeah, we will never overrun that 6 gigabyte VRAM budget. We made sure of that. If you don't have that VRAM, let's say you are in a system that doesn't have any dedicated VRAM at all, the game will still run, but you might encounter more issues like textures being blurry because the data just doesn't get fed quickly enough, or there might be more issues with frame drops, something like that. So yeah, for a good experience going forward, we recommend a 1060 at least.
And then anti-aliasing, another aspect of, I'm going to put it under performance, basically. I know that was something that you and I discussed briefly before we started recording as a big area for Unreal 5 and what you guys have been working on. Can you break down what anti-aliasing is and maybe the changes we're going to see in Unreal 5?
Yeah, so anti-aliasing is more and more becoming a core of the rendering pipeline, and it comes with the nature of adding more geometry. So I want to quickly demonstrate why. So let's say we have a tree, very simple tree here.
Okay.
And so this tree is really far out in the distance for us right now, and so we're gonna have pixels. We're gonna look something like that, like our pink squares here. Each of them is a pixel. And now what does a pixel show, right? Half of the pixel is tree and the other half maybe is blue sky in the background. What does the pixel display? How do you figure that out? In the most plain simple rendering, like if you look back at the early 90s, you sample the center of each pixel. And that center of each pixel would be what gets measured and decided whether we show a tree or the background. And so you can see the issues with that, right? As we move the camera and you move onto the tree or back out of the tree, it flickers between brown or white. So this would cause a really noisy image. And that also causes stuff like stare artifacting. So anti-aliasing's job is to fix that, to say, if it's half blue and half brown, then I'm going to draw the middle ground of that. And then our brain solves it. Our brain will turn it back into a tree. And there are many technologies that have been used for anti-aliasing over the years, but the industry standard for many, many years now is temporal solutions. And so they have the advantage of using the component of time to accumulate extra information and gather that sub-pixel detail. So what a temporal AA method does, it samples the image or the pixel, it jitters the entire image, meaning it samples each pixel at slightly different points each frame. So that looks something like this, for example. We have many sample points, and that means it can now gather information of how much of that pixel is tree and how much of it is background and use that. But of course, it takes multiple frames to accumulate that information. So now it needs motion information, like how does our camera move and how does the background move, to compensate for that, so that if something shifts, we still get a correct image. We avoid things like ghosting and blurring. And so that's where early temporal AA solutions, like we have in UE4 right now, have a lot of issues. They're not great at stabilizing the image, and they cause a lot of ghosting. And that's maybe one of the areas that has seen the most advancement recently. And we understand with Nanite how much more important that is becoming. Because in traditional UE4, like let's say you look at a tree like that in the distance, it's actually not a tree. It's just maybe this kind of mesh actually looks exactly like a paper, the geometry. And it's just a mass material. So the part that's not the tree is see-through. And so you don't have a lot of geometry there. But with Nanite now, this tree is all geometry, and you have all that detail that's in there. And we need really good anti-aliasing to both remove the noise from the image, that jitter, but also make sure that as much detail as possible is captured. And so we have integrated all the latest methods, both Unreal engines and TSR, which is a new temporal AA that comes with UE5. And we have implemented DLSS4 from NVIDIA, Intel's XeS S2, and FSR4, which is, as of today, it's still in review with AMD. We don't have a card yet to try this one ourselves. But with the full release, that should be fully live as well, so that we give all players the option to choose their preferred AA method. And another advantage that comes with these AA methods, because they are quite expensive, right? That's the downside. They do so much complicated math that there is a significant frame budget spent. But because they are capturing sub-pixel accuracy, right? Each pixel gets actually a lot of samples. They allow you to get a more detailed scene, even if your native rendering resolution is reduced. So that's why they're also called upscaling solutions. It's because you can render the image at a lower resolution, but because you're sampling it at many different points, you're getting an effective higher resolution out of it, allowing you to save cost on the native rendering side that you can then use to run them. And for players who don't like it, we also still allow you to turn off AA completely, which would also allow you to make any driver-side overrides. So if you have a preferred old school AA solution that you might want to run, they can just be enabled on the driver side, because some players don't mind that noise, right? It's really personal preference. And so we want to allow everyone to play Squad the way they prefer.
All right, Norby, we had to do a quick reset here, but we're going to look forward now to just a couple of things I want to talk about. And one of those is kind of short-term expectations for Offworld, maybe through the rest of 2025. What are you guys looking at from a tech side? What do you like? I guess what expectations, man? What do you guys think is hoping to gain and have the player base gain over the course of the rest of the year?
So Squad has 10 years of content. And so part of this is updating legacy content to make full use of UE5, because a lot of this update that's happened so far was automated, because there are not enough people to manually optimize things. But as we go through content biomes and update them, they will get more performant, but what it will also allow us is to make more use of these features. So for example, PBR, physically based rendering, it's properties for materials, for let's say how rough they are, to define their reflection properties. If these values weren't set right on UE4, no big deal. On UE5 now, with the new lighting, that really stands out. So the lighting isn't really tuned to its maximum effect at all. It's still a mix of kind of this old school diffuse bleeding light where everything is magically lit. There's still some of that, and then there's the new ray traced lighting mixed into it. But as we go forward, we can move more into that direction of relying on the ray traced lighting, and so you see more advancements iterative over time, how these improvements come in. It allows us to do fully dynamic things now, like changing time of day and weather, where technically we could do that before, but because we were using, for example, reflection captures for reflections, these wouldn't update with the weather, so then you get really inconsistent results there. And now with a fully dynamic scene, we can actually do this kind of stuff without weird visual results. So we'll work towards that. really this UE5 upgrade is just the beginning of being unblocked towards a whole new journey of improvements over years and years and years.
Yeah, so I guess to just highlight a note there is that the expectation to some extent is going to be that let's say UE5 launches on a specific day in an upcoming month, it's going to be a process to get it to, from at least a tech perspective, it sounds like, how far you guys can actually take it. Like there's going to be plenty of work to be done even beyond, okay, it's available, to down the road,
Yeah.
right?
This is an interesting point where internally there often comes up the question of whenever we do an engine upgrade is what is the right time to release it, right? How do we determine that? And the answer really is the right time to give a new engine version to players is when it's better than the old one, right? There's always trade-offs with everything, but overall the experience in that new version is better than the old one. And then part of playtesting is getting that feedback on whether that is the case right now or not. But what you're getting is not the end all of Squad in Unreal Engine 5. It's the beginning of the journey of Squad in Unreal Engine 5.
Okay, I think that's really interesting and very important. And I would like to kind of wrap it up here with, what are you most excited about with this transition?
There's so many things we have done in here that we wanted to do for a really long time. And really for me as a founder who's gone through the entire development journey of Squad, this is really a lot of the checkbox items we had for, if we were ever going to do a second version of Squad. This is really it, right? This is a new generation of Squad. And we have achieved it within the same game. I don't think there's a single other game that has updated all the way from the first version of UE4 into current version of UE5. And so just having achieved that within the game, and of course with the support of the community, going through all that and keeping things up to date, really proud of that accomplishment. But as it comes down to a specific feature of what we've developed, it has to be the physics engine. Where Squad in UE4, the main physics engine in UE4 was NVIDIA physics, and that dates back to 25 years when that physics engine was developed, and eventually NVIDIA bought it. But there wasn't really a lot of development investment for a long time. When we wanted to compile the physics engine, we had to use Visual Studio 2015. It was the latest supported version, so it was a lot of pain to deal with it because it was discontinued. And so we knew we had to take that step, right? You have to at times get rid of legacy software to get rid of problems. And we took that step with UE5, and we had to write a completely new vehicle system as a result of that. The old NVIDIA physics comes with a vehicle system, and that's what we utilized. We expanded it. It only supported four-wheeled vehicles. We added tracked vehicles and vehicles with more than four wheels, but we never changed it to the extent that we wanted to get the results. And it was not very approachable, and it was a problem for modding as well. And for the first many years, I was the only one actually tuning the vehicles because I have a background in automotive after the army, where I actually understood then all these weird physics terms that were used there and what they would do, but it was a full-on simulation, and it made it very hard to use. And so the vehicles were never the way we wanted them to be. Not just that you don't generally want a programmer to be your designer, but it was also too limiting in what we want to achieve. And so we took all these learnings about all these limitations and wrote our own vehicle system in Chaos. It's designed with performance in mind for the kind of game we have, with the scope we have. And it's designed with the flexibility in mind, and it's designed with actual designers, where they got to say, how do we want the vehicles to behave in a game like Squad? And where do we want to simulate, and where do we want to gamify things? In UE4, when I set up a vehicle, I wanted it also to be approachable. The game I actually looked at is funny enough, it's GTA, because GTA 5, GTA Online is really commonly played to this day. And it has that full spectrum of vehicles. Like it has big heavy trucks. It has sort of armored vehicles, right? There's this money transport truck, and it has tanks. And so it has representations of all the kind of vehicles we have in Squad in an open world. And so I wanted the vehicles to feel similar. Like if you were used to driving a truck in GTA, you could drive a truck in Squad and get similar results. Now, of course, taking some of the realism from my own experience with military vehicles in the army in there. But that was the approach, and it was very limited in achieving that goal because it was a pure simulation. And now it is designed to do what we want. Of course, there's more things that designers want. I guess just opening that box again, but it's been in the works for well over a year now. And we have also made some of that available to some modders already, and the feedback has been incredibly positive. So this is going to be another stepping stone in that journey of Squad, where one of these goals that we had from the start that we didn't have the means to achieve, now we have accomplished it.
Yeah, I think seeing some of what is coming for vehicles, the changes, I think is going to be, it was sort of a pleasant surprise for me. That was not something that I expected to see. And then seeing some of the clips that have been shared publicly, or in playtesting, it's just been really cool. Just the better flexibility of vehicles with terrain, being able to go over rock, not get stuck. Because I would say that something you've touched on several times is like how the game plays for me in the moment, And one thing that always takes me out of the game is if I get stuck in a vehicle on something like a high centered with a rock underneath or something like that. That removes the entire simulation of the game. So I think that's a really cool area that you guys have been able to work on. I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, that was caused by the old physics system being so low performant that each wheel is actually just a line trace. Mm-hmm. Just a single point tracing down to hitting any surface. And so it's not actually wheels. If you imagine a vehicle from the physics perspective, it's just sitting on 4 single points. And those are the only points it considers. And if they don't hit the right thing, then you get stuck. And now we have proper colliders. A wheel is actually a wheel shape in UE5. And it took some fancy things to get there, SIMD instructions being used to make that performant on the CPU. But it runs really well. You can have lots of vehicles at the same time, and you're far less likely to get stuck.
Very cool. Norby, thank you very much for joining me. This was awesome. I really wanted an opportunity to chat with you guys and get a breakdown of some of the tools, the technology that goes into this. So this was awesome. I really appreciate it. And definitely looking forward to talking to you more down the line a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And that is my interview with Norby. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a tech deep dive into some of the behind the scenes having to do with Squad's transition to Unreal 5. I've also tucked in as much content as I possibly could, some of which was captured on my own and some of which was provided by Offworld to help understand and visualize some of these changes that we're going to see in Squad. A big shout out to Offworld for allowing me this opportunity to interview Norby, because I think this was really interesting. I wanted to make it at least somewhat approachable for folks that are less familiar with some of the tech side of game development like me. But what I hope to do is a follow-up video that'll go over some of my overall impressions, thoughts, and things that I'm looking forward to in Squad with the Unreal 5 update. So if you're looking forward to that, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with your thoughts, and I'll catch you next time.